I'll start now. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. I am really, really grateful. And I just wanted to start really by giving a massive shout out to Greg and Lewis, who are absolutely gorgeous people, and who've just done an amazing job in organising all of this. I really can't believe how much it's sort of just blown up. My name's Ashton Mills. I'm a lead audio designer at Jagex, where I am at the moment. One of these old school people who actually works in the building at their studio. I'm here today to talk about feedback, giving feedback in game audio, and doing so in a way that is meaningful and thoughtful. I wanted to just sort of start by saying that, I said this to Greg earlier, this was a bit of an experimental subject for me to sort of launch out on something like this with. I was thinking about Greg asked me, could I do a talk? And I said, okay, what should I talk about? And I thought, well, I could do something about game audio programming or about sound design or maybe music. But I decided to kind of try something a bit different for myself and a bit different maybe for the conference, and talk about some soft, fluffy, light stuff about feelings and communication. So I don't know how it's going to go, and I'm hoping that we will all be able to sort of extract something meaningful from this, and I'm looking forward to sort of hearing what people think about it. So without further ado, let's launch in. I just want to give a disclaimer as well that this is me, this is my thoughts, my opinions, my views, with the experience that I've got working in games, and it's not the views of Jagex. Okay, so why do we want to talk about giving feedback in games? It's, I can hear sort of people sort of looking at I can see people looking at the program and go, why do we want to talk about feedback? This is a really exciting game audio conference. We could be talking about all sorts of things. Why are we talking about this sort of really dry, boring subject like this? And the answer to that is, I believe that feedback is the helm. It's the helm that we use as leaders in games to steer projects towards the destination that we want to take them in. It's how we course correct. It's how we make sure everything is going in the right direction. And so because of that, giving feedback in some form it makes up about 25% of my job. Of what if you actually look at what I do on a day-to-day basis with my time, about 25% of it is giving feedback. So it's a really large part of the work of a game audio designer at a certain level and in a certain role. I think when we think about feedback in game audio, there are different sort of ways we do it. I mean, the obvious context in which I give feedback is to the people who I manage or lead directly. So I'm an audio lead on a project. So I have a team of people who I work with, and and so I give feedback on their work. Maybe that's sound design, or maybe it's some systems design or things like that. We also have in game audio, we give feedback to people in other teams. Maybe it's not something that I kind of work directly on, but maybe my colleague, who's working on some music for another game here at Jagex, maybe they want some feedback on something and I'll give that to them. There's also giving feedback to people in other teams that we work with. So maybe like the engineering teams or like design teams, QA teams, that maybe people who support us, or at Jagex we have a really kind of collegiate culture with design. So if I'm playing a game that I'm working on, even though I'm not a designer, maybe I want to say, oh, actually, I found the UI to be a bit janky. We have a culture which kind of facilitates that. So giving feedback is really important. And then there's also feeding back to people live. We do a lot of stuff in game audio where we're actually feeding back on people who are doing things live with us. So, giving feedback to a few months ago, I was working with a choir, and I'm there, giving feedback to them as they are performing some music that I've written, and giving feedback on how they're performing it, or maybe giving feedback to VO artists as they're performing scripts for a game. So the feedback live in the moment. So these are the different contexts in which we do it, and so I believe that giving feedback done badly will erode trust, it will destroy teams and relationships, and it will lead to bad work, or it will lead to good work in the short term, but with a very high long-term cost. When done well, feedback builds strong creative relationships, healthy teams, and it leads to people being in a state of flow and achieving their best work. And I believe that the games industry generally needs to have a more cohesive and thoughtful process for giving feedback as a step towards improving other crucial, improving and working towards other crucial goals, like making better games, having healthier teams. And I also think it has an impact on diversity and inclusion as well. A little bit of relevant background on me and why this is important. I come from a background in community music and community arts before I came into games. I did a master's in leadership at a music school, so it was like a music master's. And then after doing that, I went and did a lot of work in community. I worked a lot with vulnerable young people, vulnerable adults, including homeless people, people in youth centres, children's hospital with children with long-term health conditions, and I also did a lot of. I was a fiddle teacher as well. I'm a fiddler, as you can see from my picture. I taught the fiddle. I also ran a few bands, and one of them was a ceilidh band. A ceilidh is like a sort of Celtic version of Celtic barn dance, so like at weddings and parties and stuff, you know, playing the fiddle and trying to get all these drunk people to kind of dance in some cohesive way. And I think these have all really kind of informed my, you know, how I think about game audio and sort of getting into kind of game audio leadership. You know, giving feedback in all of these situations is a really, really huge part of it. You know, if you tell somebody who's kind of, you know, learning to play the fiddle, you know, you kind of give them feedback in a way that's really kind of not very helpful, then, you know, they might just want to pack it in. You know, they need, you know, we need to have, it really informs what we do as teachers, as mentors, as tutors. And I think, you know, it's just worth pointing out, like I spent quite a lot of time in my life working with people who don't really believe that they can do things, and encouraging them and pushing them to sort of, you know, believe in themselves and be their best selves. So let's move on to some sort of hardcore leadership theory time. There's a really, really important pivotal concept that came out from a book from 2017 by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. It's a really crucial concept in giving feedback, when and how we give feedback, and the kind of foundations that need to be laid in order for that feedback to be good. The kind of the core concept is that you need to care personally about the people you feedback to and challenge them directly, and you need to do both. It can't be either. You know, or neither. It has to be both. So there, like all good theories, that comes with a quadrant. You cannot have a theory without a quadrant, right? The book is called Radical Candor as well, very helpfully named. So if you've got this axis on the y-axis, it's do we care personally about the recipient of the feedback, or do we not? And then on the x-axis, are we challenging them directly, or are we not? Thanks, Greg, for sending the link. You're so efficient. You're amazing. Isn't Greg amazing? So if you care personally about somebody, if you build the foundations to form a relationship with that person, and you get to know them, and that sort of, you know, they understand that you have their best interests at heart, then you're caring personally about them. If you do that and you challenge people directly, and you don't sort of just let things slide, then that's radical candor, and that's good. We like that. If you challenge people directly, but you don't actually demonstrate any kind of care about who they are as a person and how that might be received, that's called obnoxious aggression. If you care personally about somebody, but you don't, but you just let everything go, and it's, yeah, that's fine, yeah, don't worry about it. You know, that's ruinous empathy, and that's awful. Because you know, that's how people get blindsided. It's how, you know, nobody wants to be in the situation where they're getting positive feedback that's not meaningful and not truthful. It builds a completely false sense of who we are. And I think if we've ever been in that situation before, where that, you know, where the rug kind of gets pulled out from under us and we have been blindsided, you know, we can see how hurtful that can really be to people in the long run. And then manipulative insincerity is when you don't do either of those things, and you just sort of let everything go, and you don't challenge anybody, and you don't care about them either. Yeah, and then just on that, like, I think when, you know, when relationships are strong and caring personally is like firmly cemented within a work relationship, feedback often doesn't feel like an exchange of feedback. It just feels like a natural flow. And I sort of sometimes think about the relationship that concept artists have with designers actually here at Jagex. Like, I've seen that there's such a natural back and forth, such a natural flow in that relationship that they're you know, it just sort of happens, and it doesn't have this kind of like really doesn't feel like this sort of formal kind of process. And then just to say that, like, you know, there's actually quite a lot of talk about this. Can you see my mouse? Can you see my mouse? I'm circling around ruinous empathy. There's quite a lot of talk about why this is really problematic, and it really is a problem. But I think my big thing, what I really care about is the caring personally bit, and why it's so much more. Why caring personally about people that you give feedback to is much more than just sort of softening the blow and kind of cushioning people from having hurt feelings. But it goes so much deeper than that, and that's something I want to kind of explore. Thank you for seeing my mouse. That's great. Cheers, guys. Right, so moving on. The feedback sandwich. Greg, am I allowed to swear in this? What's your sort of swearing policy? I'll only do it once, promise. If it's not cool, I'll spell it instead. The feedback sandwich. It's waiting for it. Yes, excellent. Thank you, Greg. Okay. So in the UK, we often call it we don't call it the feedback sandwich. We call it the shit sandwich. It's the principle of the feedback sandwich. The shit sandwich is essentially, you know, you have something positive, something that, you know, positive that you say, and then you put your critical piece of feedback in the middle, and then you have another piece of positive stuff underneath that. And like, it's something that I'm sure a lot of us have heard before. You know, and the idea being that you kind of smuggle the shit in between those lovely slices of delicious fresh rye bread. You know, it's a real cliche, and it's actually very easy to be really transparent with that. When somebody gives me that kind of feedback, I'm often just sort of like, oh God, you know, here we go. But and I think partly that's because it's robotic. You don't actually need to smuggle in your shit with a sandwich. I think, but the principle really of this is that it's not, you don't just sort of serve it cold on its own solo, and that's really important. There's a big misconception about what function that bread is having in the feedback sandwich, in the shit sandwich. I think a lot of people think it's there to soften the blow. It's there to not, so you don't hurt people's feelings. But actually it's not. It's there to point to what is going well. It's there to reinforce what is going well. How we conceptualize the work that we're doing, if we you know, if it's a sort of a case of, right, screw it up, throw it in the bin, start again, we're going to think completely differently about that. If it's not that, it's keep that bit. Those things are great. Let's change what we've got to improve it. But I think what's important is that the bread needs to be good. The bread needs to be relevant. It needs to be meaningful. So I think, like, let's give an example here. Let's say, you know, Greg, okay, let's say, you know, you've asked me to do a piece of sound design for like a creature doing like a special ability. And then I give you this piece of work, and it's not my best work, you know, like it's not that brilliant. And so, Greg, you know, you say, oh, Ashton, you know, thanks for sending that piece of work. You know, you're looking nice today. That sound design you did sucks. It was really bad. But I like your shoes. Well, thanks, Greg. You know, that was great. Cheers, mate. I didn't find that particularly kind of like helpful. You bastard. The criticism, it needs to be, if the criticism is specific, then the praise needs to be specific as well. And also, our relationship is, it's based on work. So if you just sort of tell me some things that are really, that are personal, and then the criticism is about the work, then there's a real mismatch there. It just doesn't work. It doesn't flow. And so, and another really good example of that is, yeah, Greg, come on. I need to give better feedback at Greg giving feedback, really. But, I have another example of that is, I worked with somebody who was doing placeholder VO, so it's a sound designer, in the team. They needed to do some placeholder VO because the VO artist wasn't going to record their bit until the work, until the script had been finalized and so on. And so the sound designer was just going to kind of fill it in with their lovely voice. A senior person, in the team was kind of giving them some feedback, and they sort of said they used that placeholder VO that they did, which was a really great piece of work, as the bread in the shit sandwich. And it's like, and then the response to that was, well, that's not, I don't want to be praised for that. That's not meaningful to me. That was just a little throwaway thing that I did. I'm not an aspiring voice actor. I'm a sound designer. And so it's just an example, really, of like, kind of how we kind of need to align the praise and the criticism to be within the same ballpark, really. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So we know who, yeah. My team here. Being wonderful. I can't believe you guys are all here. Thanks so much for coming. You're so lovely. An example of some good bread. An example of a good shit sandwich. I love the strong attack on this sound effect. It has a powerful impact. The body sounds thin and incredibly over-processed and washed with reverb. There are some really strong elements with the source that's been chosen, and it will sound great if we approach it in a different way. There's what I think is a really nicely written piece of feedback. Basically, it's kind of some feedback that I wrote to somebody relatively recently, so kind of changed it a little bit. And I think one thing that's important there is, you notice that I said we. It would kind of be different if I said, if you approach the sound in a different way. If we approach the sound in a different way, it softens the whole thing, but also it's saying, we're on the same team here, like we want the same things. I'm here with you. I'm partnering with you. I'm not telling you what to do. And I think, one of the, what if, I can't quite see that question because it's been cut off by the chat thing. 1 second. Could somebody else just write like blah, 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 blah into the chat, and then that thing will move up and I don't have to move on my screens, because you just like hammer it with the load. Actually, I can do it. Thank you. If you don't have any meaningful bread on that person, e.g. with a new mentee, thank you. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, Elmut. And, that was exactly the next thing that I was going to say. And the answer is, in my view, in my opinion, and I understand people might disagree, but I've worked with everybody from like skilled professionals to rowdy school children who have absolutely no experience whatsoever in what they're doing. And there is always something positive to talk about. You just need to listen. You just need to find it. And being able to find it and being able to hone in on it is a skill in itself. And it takes time to hone that. I hope that is a kind of, an all right sort of response to that question. Of course, willing to talk more about, and get some questions and thoughts later on at the end of the talk. But yeah, feel free to chime in, people, as we go through. Right, next thing I want to talk about is mindset. So here's another book. Also, that is the name of the book and the name of the concept, by Dr. Carol Dweck. People may have come across this one before. So the idea of mindset is essentially that there are two types of mindset that we can have as people: fixed mindset and growth mindset. A fixed mindset essentially is somebody who believes that we have a kind of a certain pre-allocated capacity in how we're going to achieve at particular fields. We have a certain amount, essentially a certain amount of talent that is finite, given to us at birth, and that, and that's it. So, maybe somebody says, okay, well, I'm good at maths, and that's it. That's it. I'm just good at maths. That's it. A growth mindset is somebody who's not really concerned with what's been dished out to them at birth. They're not really concerned with upholding any kind of like status as like, oh, I'm the person who's good at this thing. They just sort of, it's all, the focus for somebody with a growth mindset is to learn and grow and develop, and just keep improving. Now, in game audio, like, it's almost like you don't even need to have this conversation so much in game audio, because we have everybody really, I don't think I've met anybody in game audio who doesn't have a growth mindset about themselves, because, we have a very autodidactic field. We learn so much of, our field, by ourselves, from ourselves. We teach ourselves things. And so it's almost like you probably couldn't get into this work if you didn't have a growth mindset. But one thing I think is interesting is how much do we have a growth mindset on behalf of other people? How much do we see other people as entities that can grow and develop and change, versus other people being something, being fixed? We might sort of think, oh, well, X person is good at Y, bad at X. This person is a good programmer, but they're not a good sound designer. This person's a fantastic musician, but they're not very good at communicating with other people in the team. Like, I would never sort of think of myself in those ways, and if I did, it would always be an opportunity for me to kind of change and improve at those things that I wasn't so good at. So how about we extend that to other people as well? And I think that's really important when we give feedback to people, is that we don't see people as a kind of a fixed set entity. They are, every human being is a work in progress, ourselves included. Everybody has gaps in their knowledge. That's normal. That's part of, just being people. We don't sort of have these kind of set milestones that we have to kind of get through in our work. In game audio, everything's just like, blah, there's a bit of this, bit of that, blah, blah, blah. It's this huge, very kind of nebulous, chaotic kind of field that involves so many different things. Of course, we're all going to have gaps in our knowledge, and strengths and weaknesses. And so, I think it's important to not dismiss or ridicule people, whether to their face or in private, if they're struggling with something, or if there's room for improvement in their skill bases. My partner's a family therapist, and so we have quite a lot of chat about these kind of things. And she said one quote she comes up with, which I don't know who it's by. According to Google, it's Bob Dylan, but I don't think she would be quoting Bob Dylan. She says, we are all in a constant state of becoming. We are all in a constant state of becoming. And I love that. I want to share that. So another book and another concept. These people are great because they just name their books after their sort of general concept, and it's easy to remember. This book is called Flow. It's by an Hungarian-American psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he was studying the phenomenon of flow. Now, probably everybody here has experienced what flow is. Flow is when you get into a state where you lose track of time. You are completely connected with what you're doing. The rest of the world and all your other concerns are all kind of you kind of push them aside, and you're just really getting on with stuff. And you're loving it, and your brain is firing off all these neurotransmitters, and you're just loving it. You're getting a real dopamine high and everything. Csikszentmihalyi studied this and was particularly interested in what it is, what's going on in your brain when it happens, but also what are the criteria for making it happen? How can we get to that point? For ourselves or for other people, how can we get other people to that state? And he defined criteria for which you can get into that state. There are certain things that have to be the case in order for you to get into a state of flow. Flow is so important for him. He called it the optimal experience. It's like the peak of being human is being in flow. But I mean, there are several of the criteria, and I can't actually remember them all. But there are two which I think are really pertinent to this talk, and to to game audio. And one of them is that feedback needs to be fast. You can't just sort of have you can't just sort of do something and then have to put on hold and then wait until you hear back from somebody about how it went, or like really kind of waterfalling with stuff. There needs to be a really quick back and forth. That is crucial to being in flow. And the other one that's really relevant is the skill challenge ratio. So if you think of like a continuum, and you've got, can you see both my hands? Yeah. So on one hand, you've got, something which is so easy, a task which is so easy that you could do it with your eyes closed and you have, hands tied behind your back. And the other is, something that's really hard, and it's sort of really far beyond where you're at right now, beyond your current skill base. And Chick Semi-High said there's a window within that continuum where where you can achieve flow. It has to be not so easy that it's boring and monotonous and tedious that your mind will wander to something else, not so challenging that it just causes you to be really frustrated, and too far away from what you can achieve. As leaders, it's our job to position people within that window as best we can. And that's how people are going to really thrive and do their best stuff. But what's really important about feedback, and the kind of the TLDR here, is that, we don't do our best work when we feel like crap. And we need to take that into consideration when we give people feedback on something. We do our best work when we feel confident and empowered. And so, because where we are on that window is subjective. And if we're feeling like crap, then our window is going to be way down on this side. So, I think that's why this is really important as a subject. Just checking the chat. Yes, brilliant. Is this the Yerkes-Dodson curve? Oh, is it? I don't know, but that sounds great. I like that. I will look that up. The Curator and Editor. So one of the things that kind of comes from having a workshop leading background as well is that, I've done a lot of work where people are throwing creative ideas at me. Like maybe we're doing like a group songwriting session in a primary school or something like that. People are throwing these ideas out, like a kid, has the confidence to put up their hand and say, give an idea for the next line. You're not going to be like, no, Reggie, that's a terrible idea. Like you need to, we need to treat all ideas with respect, whether or not they are going to be the ones that we include within our project, within our piece of music, within whatever it is. There is no such thing as a bad idea. It's context. Another thing my therapist partner says to me, all the time, is there's no meaning without context, which is a quote from the sociologist Bateson. There is no meaning without context. Context is absolutely crucial. What we're doing as a leader is we're curating the experience. We're taking things that come in and we're curating them. And I like to think of like leading on a project is a bit like, it's a bit like creating a pile of Smarties of a certain color. So let's say we're doing a little project and we're creating a big pile of orange Smarties. So we're going to go down to the shop and we're going to buy like loads of boxes of Smarties. And we're going to sort of select, all the orange ones and put them in a pile. We're not passing any judgment on the quality of the brown Smarties and the blue Smarties and the purple Smarties. Those are all great. Okay, they're fantastic Smarties. They taste brilliant, but they're just not orange, so they're not going in the project. And that's how I like to sort of approach kind of selecting ideas and giving feedback to people. It's about the context of the project. That's why we have pillars. That's why we have vision. That's why we have direction. It's about, we're firmly cementing from the beginning what goes in and what doesn't go in, not just for quality purposes, but for contextual purposes. I had some feedback recently. Sorry, I had some work back from somebody recently, an outsourcer, and they were doing some creature sound design, and they made this thing that sounded like an evil calculator. It was fucking cool. It was really awesome sound design, but it just wasn't the game. It didn't fit with the game that we're making at all, and that's cool. Like that's fine. I'm in a really great position at the moment because I'm leading somebody on a project who is like way more experienced than I am. They've got like 15 years more experience than me in game audio. But I'm still kind of leading them, and I'm still kind of curating the work that they send me. And it's like a really, really nice dynamic. I really like it. I learned so much from this person. And I think of the leadership part of it is not really it's not really like any kind of hierarchical thing. It's just like, it's like a role. It's like being the goalie, you know, like, you know, in football, you know, somebody's kind of got to do that job really. And I think, you know, I'm reminded a little bit about when I was when I went to record my EP with my band, like about 10 years ago or something. And, you know, we were a massive band, and we had like a tuba and a cello and a fiddle. I was playing the fiddle. We had like guitarist, drummer, clarinet, flute, you know, and everybody, we went off and recorded it. And then like a month later, we all went to the mixer's house, and he was kind of showing us the rough mix. And then everyone was kind of putting up the hand saying, oh, can you turn up the flute? Can you turn up the fiddle? Can you turn up the guitar? Can you turn up the tuba? And you know, like, the mixer's job was to think about the whole mix, whereas the cellist's job was to think about the cello. And you know, and that just kind of goes to show really where that feedback is coming from. It's coming from somebody who's kind of got an overview, somebody sort of seeing the project and how it fits together. Okay, hot take from me: it is always personal. Giving feedback to somebody is personal. I've heard it said before, you know, I'm not criticizing you, I'm criticizing your work. And as if that is a sort of a get out of jail free card for giving out feedback. It really is not. It's always personal. We are just going to take it. How many of us really can distance ourselves from our work? You know, and feel like, you know, how we, you know, it's a bit like stage fright for performers. If you don't have any of stage fright, then you're not going to be performing with passion. You need to have something. You can't let it crush you, but you need to have something. And I think stage fright and attachment to work are, you know, are similar in that way. You know, if we don't care about what people think about our work, then how much passion for it can we really have? You know, it just is, you know, our work is personal. You know, and I think that's okay. That doesn't mean we should shy away from giving feedback. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't, you know, give feedback that is challenging. It just means that we have to bear that in mind. We have to bear in mind that people will take things personally. And I think, you know, I want to just mention about imposter syndrome there. You know, imposter syndrome, we all have it. I mean, like, you know, hands up in the chat if you don't have imposter syndrome at some point. Like, you know, everyone has it, and it doesn't go away as you move through your career, I think. And so we need to be aware of that. Like, we might be aware of our own imposter syndrome, but how much do we think about that in other people? And how much do we, you know, we need to bear that in mind when we give feedback to somebody. Really short thing here. Belief and convincing. I believe that if you're a good leader, you can convince somebody that they have the capacity to do things better. They have the capacity to learn and grow. And do their things in the way that you want to hear them. You have to convince them of that. That's your job. And if you can do it, then you're a good leader, I think. Being able to convince people about these things and being able to believe in people and convince them to believe in themselves is a skill you need to hone. And I think we can all get better at that all the time. And then before I move on to sort of the more receiving side of feedback, I want to just sort of go through a couple of questions that we could think of before. I'm going to talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome in a minute, actually. But thank you, chaps. A couple of questions about, you know, so before you give some feedback, am I nitpicking? According to Kim Scott of Radical Candor fame, nitpicking is not radical candor. And she says, as a rule of thumb, every day leave 3 unimportant things unsaid. You know, am I nitpicking? Another question is, am I giving feedback to elevate the game, to elevate the recipient and to help them learn and grow? Or am I giving feedback to make myself look clever? You know, I've seen in the past, you know, somebody give feedback, a very senior person give feedback to a very junior person in a way that was like a kind of a sort of almost like a tirade of really kind of bamboozling things. And, you know, and the response to that wasn't to elevate them. It wasn't to help them. It was, you know, it was kind of really to sort of, to kind of create some kind of you know, what's the context in which that feedback is going to be heard? I think that's really, really important. And I think we could all be, you know, in that. It doesn't necessarily need to have a nefarious intent. It's not like, oh yes, I'm going to totally like squish that person down by asking them these really challenging questions. But maybe we're just not really thinking enough before we give the feedback to recognize what the intent of it is. Another question is, you know, is this feedback going to be hard? Should I rehearse it beforehand? Another is, how am I going to leave the situation after I give the feedback? Am I going to drop it and then leave the room? Am I going to hang out? Are we going to be doing something informal? Have we got a plan for afterwards? Have we got tea? You know, is there cake? You know, these things are really important. Cake is very important. And the context of the work also needs to be, you know, cannot be ignored. The number of times I think, you know, that people sort of say, oh, well, you know, I don't want to hear excuses, you know. Well, actually, do you know what? We work in games. Did the animations get finished on time? Or you know, this piece of work that I did for Greg earlier, you know, what do you know what, Greg? Like, the animations only got done at 6 last night, and I worked through the night on it, and I gave it to you at 10 because it was due. You know, like, that doesn't mean that Greg has to say, oh, okay, well, that's fine then. You know, Greg can still tell me that he wants me to improve it. He can still tell me that it's not going to pass the muster. You know, I would like it if Greg took into account the challenges that I had there. Game studios, especially big game studios, yeah, they're really complex places, and like spanners are being thrown in the works constantly, all the time. You know, it's so easy for everything to just get completely derailed. You know, for all sorts of small and big reasons. There are so many reasons why it's very difficult for us as game audio people to do our best work. And so when you give feedback to people, you need to bear that in mind, you know, take that on board as well. Okay. Yeah. So I again, I can't quite see what was happening in what that person did. It looked like it was good. Yeah, okay. This seems to be important work through. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Right, and then I'm going to skip through this bit because we all run out of time. Imposter syndrome. Just a little bit on this. Like, I actually added this in this morning, so it doesn't quite sort of necessarily fit with the flow of the rest of the talk. But I just kind of wanted to say that, like, I remember seeing somebody tweet, somebody who I really respect and who was like an incredible sound designer, tweet once, and she said, you know, every time she starts a new piece of work, she's always just like she goes, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do this, and then, you know, and freaks out, and then sits down and then does it, and then it's sort of like and rinse and repeat, and that her imposter syndrome has just always been that way. And I think it's just that we all have it, you know. It's such an important thing. But, you know, imposter syndrome feeds off critical feedback. You know, it's like, yum, I love critical feedback, you know, and it helps it grow. It's, you know, what it grows, and we have to be aware of that when we're receiving it. We have to be aware of that when we're giving it. Receiving. Okay, so now we're kind of transitioned in a sort of really what's the opposite of seamless, seamed way to receiving feedback from non-game audio people, right? We've all been there. Okay, you give feedback you give a piece of work to a designer, and they come back to you and they say it needs to be more epic, it needs to have more bass. And like, I actually banned designers from saying the word epic. I was just like, that just doesn't mean anything. I'm just not, like, no, because they just used to say the same thing over and over again. I think you know, designers suffer a lot from the kind of like turn up the cello, turn up the flute, turn up the bass syndrome, you know, in the sense that they're often thinking about the particular thing that they're reviewing and not how necessarily it fits within the wider picture. And of course, that's your job as the audio designer. One thing that one of the creative directors on the game that I work on said to me is, you know, I want to tell you something, I want to give you some feedback on something. I don't want you to sort of take it verbatim from me. I don't, you know, I want you to interpret what I'm saying because you're the expert, not me. I just have an inkling about what I want. And so I thought about this, and it's like, somebody might give you a suggested solution, and that might be turn up the bass. That's a suggested solution. What we then need to do is extract the problem from that suggested solution. What is the actual problem? The problem is that it doesn't make enough of an impact. Maybe, you know, and then we have to solve that problem that we've extracted. And it might well be that, you know, that it's not more bass that we need. It might be another frequency band that we kind of need to lift, or maybe it's that we you know, we need to do some ducking, or, you know, or something to kind of make something stand out. Depending on who I'm working with, and how much of a kind of a trusting and relationship has been established, I find, like, actually I will often just put in a really small amount of work on the first pass of something. You know, it just, I won't do my best work straight away in the first instance, because, you know, I'm not worried about that person thinking I'm not very good at sound design. I'm not worried about kind of proving myself to this person, because we've already been there. We know that we've got that. We're cool. So I will just throw some stuff at him, and he will say, actually, I was kind of thinking more like this. I was thinking more like that. You know, that's like being agile. And, you know, I think, you know, if you kind of work within kind of the, you know, in-house games industry, you know, we talk a lot about being agile. And it's really important, especially with what we do, being at the end of the pipeline. You know, there's so much that we have to do very dynamically. A good example of you know, that would be like, recently I was kind of doing something where, like, objects had to sort of, like, they would snap together. If you move them kind of within range of each other, they would kind of snick, snap, you know. And you know, I just took some rattly wood sounds that were recorded for something else, really quickly, just kind of bodged them together, and then made a little video and sent it off to the creative director. And his feedback to me was, you know, I like the sort of the shape, I like the size, the brevity of these sounds. You know, that they're in the right ballpark, but I kind of don't want them to be woody. I want them to be like magnetic. And then it's like, okay, brilliant, fantastic. Now we know where we're going. So then I put the time in to record the magnetic sounds, to beef them up and actually design them. Obviously, all the chopping up, the RXing, so on, you know, putting that all in. You know, if I'd done that all with the woody stuff, then, you know, I would have thrown away quite a lot of time. And I think, you know, kind of the TLDR of this is, you know, at least half the time, you need to get it wrong before you get it right. So let's get on with getting it wrong. Let's get getting it wrong out of the way so that we can get it right. I'm just going to check the chat. All about the bass, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So last but not least, I kind of want to talk about, this is where we kind of go a little bit deeper into sort of like the feelings of receiving feedback. As I said earlier, like, I think it's always personal. And I think I wanted for us to just take a moment to recognize that we all experience emotions, and they are part of being human. They're part of being an audio designer as much as they are part of being any other type of human. You know, and we're passionate about our work. And I would say, like, it's okay to sort of get really frustrated with somebody and exact cold, harsh revenge on the person who's giving you feedback, performing an outrageous character assassination on them. You know, as long as you do it in your own head or in your, like, personal notebook or something like that. But then to come back to it a couple of days later with, like, a fresh mind, when, you know, when that kind of emotional stirring has kind of settled down, you know, and then given another shot. And I find when I do that, I usually nail it, because I'm not trying to work with my brain all completely clouded by those feelings. Our old boss here at Jagex used to talk a lot about this time when he gave some feedback to somebody and they threw an Xbox controller at them, and ran off. And I mean, and then, you know, and then they kind of knocked on the door later and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. You know, I kind of accept what you said. You know, let's you know," and it was all fine. Like, it was okay. And, you know, one of the reasons why my old boss was great, you know, is because he could take that and he could just sort of say, okay, you know, like, I understand I've upset this person and we're just going to sit with it. You know, and I've been in a similar situation. Like, nothing was thrown at me. I wasn't, you know, but you know, I've given feedback to somebody who kind of has gotten very angry in the past as well. And, like, you know, I didn't sort of, like, you know, I think the worst thing you could do is sort of try and get, you know, is sort of say, well, don't get angry, don't take it personally, blah blah blah. You know, it's just, you know, you've got to sit with that anger, you've got to talk about it, you've got to understand it, and let it be. I think that, you know, and like, there's lots of different responses we might have to, let's say, you know, if Greg gave me some, if Greg gave any of us here in the room, you know, some of his harsh feedback, you know, what would it be? How might we respond to it? You know, sometimes it might just be, yeah, fair play, and move on, and cool, like that's great, you know, brilliant if we were able to do that. But what's going on underneath? Maybe we get angry, maybe we get enraged, you know, with that person or with ourselves, and it's okay to feel that way. Maybe I notice this in myself, a real tendency to want to dismiss. When people give me critical feedback, I don't dismiss it. I don't actually act on that feeling, but I feel it, and that's to dismiss people. I want to be like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. What a load of rubbish, you know, and just find ways to kind of diminish it. So I have to sort of hold on to that, and then kind of write it out, like tie myself to that mast a little bit, and then like come back to it later and be like, actually, you know what, Ashton, that person knew what they were talking about and they were right, and we need to work on it. And it's like, okay, cool, that's fine. Maybe, you know, maybe it's worse, maybe it's harder. Maybe, you know, the imposter syndrome goes into overdrive and you sort of become a husk of your former self. You know, maybe it makes you cry. Maybe, you know, you know, it really kind of destroys who you are as a person momentarily. And like, provided that it kind of lasts for a sort of a period of time and you can kind of recover from it, then that's okay as well. Like, it's okay to feel all of those things. And then I think as well, like sometimes you can have like a heroic final attempt, you know, like in an action film where the hero is like trying to do something to save the day and they keep failing and they can't do it, and at the last minute they just they power them through. You know, that happens sometimes as well, but I find that that's, you know, kind of, for me at least, it's much more rare than any of these other responses. So yeah, that is that's it. That was, you know, the ramblings of me on this subject. Yeah, I'd love to kind of open it up for people to ask some questions, but not necessarily feel they need to ask a question, but maybe they've got some experience that they want to share, or some thoughts that they have about any of this stuff. It'd be great if somebody else could sort of come and talk, but I can read out some responses if they come through. Yeah. Yeah, bloody hell, Greg. I often ask non-audio people for feedback and they say, wow, it's awesome. I'm like, nah, it's still crap, bro. That's a really important thing. Actually, you know, like when we get feedback from people and everybody thinks that what we do is amazing if they don't know about it. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with feedback when we can't really trust who it's come from because they're not an experienced professional on it? I mean, I guess I would say I take that to other people. I get, you know, I think it's good to sort of like, you know, spread the feedback around, you know, for the way where you get it from is, you know, is important. What this person thinks about this aspect of it is important, you know, but this person will have a different perspective. And then you have to sort of take everybody's feedback and kind of, you know, construct it yourself and sort of dilute it yourself. I love that, Grace, who is like just over there in the other room. Ask them why it's awesome. I think that's really nice. Do you ever just ignore feedback and convince the client feedback giver that you address the issues? No, never. No. Rods, yeah. Actually, we had somebody here who sort of said that they had, I can't remember what it was, the theory. Grace, maybe you can help me out. They sort of said, well, sometimes people just give feedback. Again, you know, they're not necessarily giving feedback because they want to elevate the work. They don't want to kind of improve something. They just kind of want to put their stamp on it. They want to kind of elevate themselves. And if that's the situation, if you can tell that somebody's doing that, then I guess, yeah, you can just sort of, you know, it's a bit, I guess it's a bit like when, you know, when you know, somebody wants something turned up in the mix and you kind of increase it by like 0.0001 or something, you know, it's like, yep, we turned it up. Do you agree with the saying, don't take criticism from people you wouldn't ask advice from? That's a really good one. I guess, Lewis, that's a really good one. I guess in a kind of like a professional circumstance, unfortunately, I guess we kind of have to sometimes. Like I wouldn't want to take criticism from somebody I wouldn't ask for advice from, but I guess, you know, we kind of we can choose our friends, but we can't choose our family, and we also can't choose our colleagues most of the time either. So um, um, thank you so much, Sam. That's really great. Is there such a thing as too much feedback? Sometimes when I comment on some work, I really like the look of, I can end up writing out a novel of feedback, which might look overwhelming. Would it be better to be concise and targeted? Jake, I love that. I'm exactly the same. Like I kind of will just create like a sort of war and peace sized text on something. And I guess I would say that you know, if you're giving like a kind of a novel of criticism to somebody, that is quite different from giving somebody a novel of praise or a novel of kind of really balanced stuff. You know, it's a little bit like, you know, with the shit sandwich. Like if you know, if you've kind of like, if you've got like some bread and then like a absolute ton of shit and then a bit of bread underneath as well, you know, that's not really going to go down that well. I would say that, you know, the amount of feedback, you know, as long as it's balanced, that's fine. But also, I guess it needs to it needs to fit the size of the work that's being fed back, I would say. So, you know, if it's for like a whole level or like a whole system that's been designed, or, you know, or a whole kind of suite of music or something like that, you know, maybe a lot of feedback is really valuable. But if it's like if it's like grass footstep number 17, you know, maybe a novel of feedback is a bit overkill. Do you agree that you should ask before giving feedback to someone if you're not in a situation that makes giving feedback necessary? Yes. Yeah. Giving feedback to a friend. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. And I think part of that is, you know, we have to understand the context in which we're giving it, like, you know, sort of like we said. And I think that kind of gives some trust as well. It kind of reminds me a little bit like when, you know, when you have a you know, in a relationship with somebody where, you know, somebody kind of maybe will complain to you about something, or, you know, or offload to you, and you ask them, do you want me to listen or do you want me to come up with solutions? And just saying that is such a valuable thing in a relationship. And I feel like the same is true of feedback. It's like, do you want me to just listen to it and, you know, and hear it? Or do you want me to tell you what I think? Do you want me to be honest? Do you want me to tell you what you like? But because also the thing is that you don't want people to tell you things that you necessarily know and have thought about already. Yeah, I think it's really important to ask before giving feedback. How would you handle feedback from individuals lacking professionalism, knowing their feedback could potentially undermine the project, yet they hold authority to determine its completion? From individuals lacking professionalism. Okay, I mean, that's a really tricky one. That is a really tricky one, and I actually have been in this situation. And I think again, like trying to broaden out where that feedback comes from is a really big part of it. You know, and trying to sort of reassure oneself that you know, that maybe that, you know, that you know, when we do our work, when we create our work, or we, you know, execute some course of action, we are almost always doing it of sound mind, with the best intentions, and with all the intuition that we have developed over, you know, the course of our careers and you know, in our lives as people. You know, we're usually doing our best. And so I think sometimes, you know, if the feedback is coming from somebody who really lacks that professionalism, we have to be able to remind ourselves that we did those things, you know, for a reason. We did what we wanted to do. We did what we chose to do for a very good reason. I think is a, you know, is a response to that. If I've understood that correctly, Red Sheep. By the way, if anybody has anything else they want to kind of talk about, to ask me afterwards, feel free to find me on like LinkedIn or whatever, and we can discuss. Agree with keeping it balanced. Crowd talk. This is slightly different. How do you manage? This is the last one I'll answer because then we're over an hour. This is slightly different, but how do you manage feedback from player base or larger groups? It seems like people generally don't know what they want, but know what they feel. I love that, Sam. That's fantastic, and I think that really kind of goes into the same camp as like, you know, it's going a level. It's about being able to interpret what that feedback means. You know, if somebody sort of they might not know exactly what the problem is, but they know something is not right. If they give a solution to something, extracting the problem from that suggested solution, and then solving what that problem is a really big part of it. You know, or just trying to think of things with, you know, with the empathy of what their experience is, but also, I guess, with the very strong pinch of soul, which is that, you know, with games, you know, there's a very vocal minority, and actually a lot of the time, you know, a lot of people might be very, very happy with how things are, and so we have to gauge that. How does this balance things out? And if we change this thing, are we actually going to upset all the people who are very happy with it? You know, so it's a balancing act. I mean, we've definitely seen that a lot on RuneScape, which has a very strong, fantastic, you know, very vocal community. Okay, I will do. I've clicked on the wrong thing. How would you respond to a lead or colleague? I'm just going to do this one more. Here we go. Lead or colleague when you feel his way of giving feedback is not great, makes you feel down. That's a really great question, Jakub, and I think the answer that my answer to that would be is to give feedback on the feedback. To be radically candid about the feedback. I've done this. I've been in this boat. Really recently, and like, what I have done is I have demonstrated to the person who's giving me the bad feedback that I care about them personally, and I've tried to get to know them a little bit more, understand their perspective, you know, demonstrate that you know, caring personally a little bit, and then give them feedback on how they give feedback. That's how I would go about that. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been amazing. I just want to say again, like, another huge thank you to Greg and Lewis for this opportunity. You know, you are absolutely wonderful, gorgeous people, and I really wish you the best of luck with the rest of AirCon. It seems like it's been absolutely incredible. So yeah, and thank you everybody for coming and participating and everything. It's been fantastic, very rewarding. So yeah, thank you guys.